Good morning, EDU 100 students. This is just a brief video to review some of the material that we began last week, which included the reading from this book, Is Everyone Really Equal? By Sensei and D'Angelo. I didn't ask you to read the book, but I did ask you to read one chapter from the book, which was How to Engage Constructively in Courses That Take a Critical Social Justice Approach. And the second part of the video is to talk about the schooling narrative a little bit that you will be revising for this week. So in terms of the chapter that you read, there are 5 guidelines that I thought I just wanted to underscore, and then one piece about grading, because I asked you to read this piece because it really informs the approach that I take and the guidelines sort of that I would ask us to follow as we enter this course together. So the first guideline is strive for humility, strive for intellectual humility. And the really important part is on page 7, where there's some bullet points there that ask you to read the material carefully, to look up and to raise questions about concepts that you don't understand, to understand or to imagine how these concepts are related to ideas that have been studied, right? So we're going to continue to return to issues across the class that are connected. And then I'm asking you also to focus on understanding, because these might be approaches to thinking about education that are new to you, rather than to agree or to disagree. So that is what they mean by intellectual humility. And finally, the 2 more parts, to engage in the practice of posing questions. So you'll be doing that a bit in discussion board further down in the semester. And then also I ask for your patience and willingness to grapple with new and difficult ideas. So I'll return to this point across the semester, but I want you to keep this in mind as we begin. The second guideline is to know that everyone has an opinion, and opinions are not the same as informed knowledge. So we have anecdotal understandings about education because we all went to school, but know that you'll be reading literature from scholars who have been studying this field for quite some time. So one of the parts of becoming a professional teacher is to begin to understand and read some of these scholars and begin to develop your own knowledge base. So this is part of this course, a part of this introductory course, is to not only be exposed to some of this scholarship, but to begin to develop your own database, right? Your own gestalt, your own framework that you can be able to refer to along your pathway to becoming a teacher. Guideline number 3 is connected to guideline 2, let go of anecdotal evidence and instead examine patterns. So especially, I'll remind you of this in a couple of weeks when you go into the next reading, and some of you have begun it already, which is from Christine Sleeter and Carl Grant. There's a chapter that's uploaded for week 3 where there are patterns that are examined in terms of social inequality in the United States that are important for understanding education. Guideline number 4, use your reaction as entry points for gaining deeper self-knowledge. So again, I'll be prompting you, or I'll be encouraging you to think about items or think about questions or concepts that are provocative. So be asking yourself, well, why am I sort of reacting in these ways? And use that reaction as a way to begin to think about and deepen your own understandings of yourself and why you're entering this field, why you want to become a teacher. And for those of you who are not going to become a teacher, sort of why educational knowledge is so important in whatever field that you're entering. Guideline number 5, recognize how your social position informs your reactions to your instructor and your course content. So Positionality is a term that the authors use, and you'll hear me use that as well. We all have unique positionalities that are grounded around race and gender and sexual orientation and class and ethnicity and language and life experiences that are shaped by those identities. So I want us to all have an awareness of that and to sort of be sensitive to how those positions inform how we write and how we read particular material. And then finally, there's a last section on grading that I think is really important. I'm actually not going to say much about this in this video because I want to make sure I don't want to overload too much information about this text. But if you take nothing else away from this chapter, be sure to read this component about grading. It really does guide how I think about grades, and you'll notice that in your schooling narrative. So you'll see that if you turn the assignment in and you turned it in by the deadline, and then you got full credit for it. That was sort of the task, was to get something down on paper and to share a bit about yourself so that I can get to know you. A part of the work that I engage in is what's called engaged pedagogy, right? So I engage in engaged pedagogy. And a part of engaged pedagogy is a term. This term has been coined by an author named Bell Hooks, and she writes about the significance of teachers being willing, teachers assigning writing assignments and asking students to be vulnerable, but also only doing that because of their own willingness to be vulnerable also. So the purpose of this schooling narrative, this first draft at least, was an opportunity to get to know you. And I'm going to share a little bit about myself. I shared last week, but I'll share a little bit more about my own schooling experience. And then in a few minutes, I'll give you some feedback about how to strengthen this final draft. But first, let me just share a little bit about my own schooling experience, because as Bell Hooks writes, if I'm asking you to complete a classroom writing assignment, then I must also be willing to put my thoughts and my ideas out there and to be taking risks so that we can enter this learning community together. So I'll read to you a little bit from my narrative that I've written about my schooling, and it's called Resisting. I attended a predominantly white school for most of my K through 12 formal education. I have always been tall. Y'all don't see me, but I'm tall. If you see me in the hallway, then you'll notice me. So by the time I entered middle school, I was my adult height. Despite my size and the fact that I was one of 2 or 3 black girls in the entire secondary school, I frequently felt invisible in classroom spaces. However, I remember becoming hyper visible in the moments prior to math class. According to the lead teacher, Mr. Sam, neither I nor the other 2 female students of color in the class were good at math. So each day at the beginning of the period, the remedial teacher, Mr. Jacks, would summon us from the doorway to take us to an alternative classroom for instruction. We would gather our things, walk across the room, and our peers often whispered comments like, "They're going to the dumb math class." It was in these moments that I felt like a giant black Alice in Wonderland, with oversized arms and legs taking up every inch of space as I trudged toward the door. This daily humiliation turned me completely off to math, and I made no effort to learn once we arrived in the separate room. Mr. Jacks would sweat through his undershirts and button down trying to teach me math, and every day I protested. I would not talk, or I talked nonstop, but not about math, or stretched in my chair or left class for long water breaks. My refusal in all my body conveyed my disdain for being placed in the dumb math class and then being reminded of this placement each day during Mr. Jack's summoning. So that's a piece from my own schooling narrative, and just like the assignment that I gave you, I've done this work myself. So I appreciate all of you for taking the risk with sort of reading those directions, and I really commend, and I noticed in everybody's piece, this vulnerability and this really detailed description. So you didn't even have my example, but yet you engaged in this really, really detailed description to paint a movie in my mind so that I could see what you were experiencing at particular moments in your life. However, there are different places where folks can have room for revision. So taking my model as an example, if you have an anecdote that sort of maybe superficially glosses over a particular moment, then my ask for your next draft, for your final draft, is to be as specific as possible. So in the directions, if you go back to those, it asks you to address like 2 to 3 sort of moments from your schooling experience. So make sure that those moments are in as much detail as possible. Some folks have done that really well. Some folks could sort of take another stab at trying to really make those, use that thick description. So there's an opportunity to do that with your revision. The second piece of advice or piece of recommendation that I would have for your final draft is regarding mechanics. So not about content, but mechanics. So a couple sort of mechanical things. Some of you did this, but I want everyone to just sort of double check for all of these items. So number one, make sure your piece is in Times New Roman 12-point font. That is the style that we use in education. Number two, always have a header on your paper. So, and that's on left side justified. So that is your name, the date, the class. This is EDU 100, which is fine, or you could put perspectives on American education, your choice. The professor's name. Those are the components that go in the header. Your piece needs a title. So my title, it was Resisting. What's your title? The assignment is schooling narrative, but the title is going to be something that you create that is representative of your piece. It's the heart of your piece. It's the gist of the document that you have created about, that's personal and that is unique to you. So create a title, and that goes center justified on your paper. Your paper is double spaced. I think I said that, Times New Roman double spaced 12-point font. Make sure that you paragraph, so you're paragraphing and your paragraphs are indented. Last two things. Only proper nouns are capitalized. So high school, for example, is a common noun, so that's not capped. If you are talking about Deerhoff High School, right, then the D, the H, and the S in those 3 words would be capitalized. Otherwise, so double check that your proper nouns are capitalized, your common nouns are not capitalized. And there's exceptions in the English language with that rule, but you can always use spell check for a reference to help you out, or you can Google it. Also, folks, and sort of lastly, folks use acronyms. I don't necessarily know. Your reader doesn't know what the acronyms stand for. So the first time that you use an acronym in any paper that you write, you spell out what that word is, and then in parentheses you can put the acronym. So for example, interrupted formal education. That means that something in your life experience where you were not in formal schooling. So there's an acronym for that. It's IFE, but the first time I write it, I have to write interrupted formal education, and I would capitalize that term actually, and then put in parentheticals IFE. So I hope that makes sense. So for September 5th, you are uploading your final draft of your schooling narrative. Use the feedback that's been provided here. Use the example that I shared from my own narrative to help you in terms of content. And then I look forward to reading those final drafts and our continued work together this semester. Okay, thank you.